What do you feel when I touch you? The research station hummed with the dull mechanical whir of air recyclers, the distant beeping of monitors, and the occasional clatter of metal instruments being arranged and rearranged in the sterile white laboratory. Dr. Elias Carter, xenobiologist, reluctant socialite, and professional avoider of small talk, sat at his workstation, trying not to look at the alien woman seated across from him. She wasn't restrained, that at least was an ethical line Elias refused to cross. Not that it made things any less unsettling. Sarah was watching him again. She always watched him calm, poised, as if she knew something he didn't, which frankly she probably did. She had an eerie way of predicting his moods, sometimes before he even fully processed them himself. It was like living with a hyperintuitive cat, if cats were 6 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, and had unsettlingly long ears that twitched when they were amused, and judging by the slight tilt of her lips, she was amused right now. You are stalling, she said in that lilting voice of hers, smooth as polished stone. Elias coughed, adjusting his posture. No, I'm observing. Her ears twitched again. You are playing with your stylus. Elias glanced down at the stylus in his fingers. Sure enough, he was spinning it in quick, nervous circles against the tabletop. Trader, fine, he muttered, setting it down. I'm stalling. Sarah inclined her head, acknowledging the concession. You do this often. Elias sighed, rubbing his forehead. I work best under pressure. She raised a single elegant eyebrow. You are a scientist, do you not control the pressure? Elias opened his mouth, then shut it again. Annoyingly, she had a point. He exhaled sharply and finally leaned forward. All right, let's get this over with. He reached out, hesitating for just a second before pressing his fingers lightly against her wrist. Her skin was warm. That was the first thing he noticed, warmer than a human's, but not unpleasantly so. The second thing he noticed was that the moment their skin met, her expression changed. Sarah's head tilted ever so slightly, her breath hitching just the faintest fraction. Then her eyes' dark silver fleck met his, and Elias felt the distinct crawling sensation of something being known. It wasn't a psychic invasion. Not exactly, but it was something. He cleared his throat. All right, what do you feel? Sarah blinked, slow and deliberate. Your first heartbreak. Elias froze. You were 16, she continued, her voice gentle but unwavering. You told yourself it was fine, but you spent 3 months avoiding her, as if pretending she did not exist would make the pain unreal. Elias yanked his hand away, as if burned. His chair scraped against the floor. All right, nope, that's enough of that. Sarah watched him with quiet curiosity. I did not mean to upset you. Elias huffed, out of breath, forcing himself to relax. You just took a deep dive into my teenage trauma. Maybe start smaller next time. She considered that your first pet, then a dog named Rusty. Elias groaned. Sarah, her ears twitched again. Definitely amusement. You do not believe me. I believe you, he said, running a hand down his face. But I don't see how it's possible. There's no neural link, no direct interface. You shouldn't be able to know any of this. Sarah exhaled, tilting her head in thought. It is not thought reading, she finally said. It is feeling. Your past clings to you, Elias. It lingers in the way you carry yourself, the weight in your voice when you touch me. I feel those echoes. Elias stared at her, his brain scrambling to find a rational explanation, but there wasn't one. He could list 1,000 species in the known universe with various forms of telepathy, empathy, or bioelectrical sensitivity, but none worked quite like this. Elias sighed. Okay, one more test. Sarah nodded. He hesitated, then, before he could talk himself out of it, reached out and placed a single fingertip against the back of her hand. Sarah inhaled sharply. Her eyelids fluttered for a fraction of a second before she refocused on him. A scar, she murmured. On your knee. You fell off a bike at 5 years old. Elias yanked his hand back so fast he nearly fell out of his chair. Sarah blinked at him, then added, you cried for exactly 28 seconds before declaring yourself a space adventurer and trying to climb onto the roof. Elias groaned, dragging a hand down his face. I knew I should have deleted those old family logs. Sarah's lips curled. Into what could only be described as a smirk, your mother has a backup copy. Elias groaned again, this time louder. I knew I should have deleted her old family logs. Sarah gave him a look that, despite being entirely alien, somehow managed to convey the exact emotion of "you are an idiot," and yet I find this endearing. Elias let out a long-suffering sigh. All right, you're weird. Your abilities are weird, and apparently my entire life story is just floating around waiting for you to touch me and read it like an open book. Sarah's ears twitched. I said it was not thought reading. It feels like thought reading. Elias muttered. Sarah hummed in quiet amusement. Would you like to test further? Elias eyed her suspiciously. Are you just trying to learn more of my embarrassing life history? She gave a slow, deliberate blink. Yes. Elias exhaled sharply. At least you're honest. Sarah tilted her head. Honesty is efficient. Yeah, well, so is not traumatizing me with childhood memories. Sarah looked so unapologetic that Elias almost laughed. Instead, he rubbed his temples and tried to process what he just learned. This wasn't just an experiment anymore, this was something else entirely. He had so many questions. But for now, he was just going to sit here, sip his rapidly cooling cup of coffee, and pretend he hadn't just experienced the single most bizarre scientific revelation of his career. He took a sip. It was indeed cold. Great, now I'm having an existential crisis and bad coffee. Sarah blinked. Would a fresh cup improve your mood? Elias sighed. Not unless you can make it not taste like industrial-grade fuel. Sarah considered. I could steal some from the officer's lounge. Elias blinked at her, then despite himself, he laughed. All right, deal, but if you get caught, I'm disavowing all knowledge of this conversation. Sarah's smirk widened ever so slightly. Understood, and for the first time since she arrived, Elias wasn't just observing his alien subject, he was talking to Sarah. The air recyclers hummed in the background, filling the research station with its familiar artificial sterility. Dr. Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Sarah with the weary scrutiny of a man who had spent the last 24 hours desperately trying to rationalize an experience that refused to be rationalized. Across from him, Sarah sat with the unshakable composure of someone who was entirely too pleased with herself. Her long ears twitched every so often, betraying amusement, though her face remained infuriatingly neutral. So Elias said, tapping his fingers against the metal tabletop. Just to recap, you don't read minds. No, you don't hack into personnel files. Sarah's lips quirked. No, and yet the moment I so much as brush against your skin, you somehow know exactly how many seconds I cried after scraping my knee when I was 5. Sarah nodded. 28. Elias groaned, dropping his head into his hands. I hate that you remember that you hate that you remember that. Sarah corrected smoothly. Elias shot her a glare, but it was weak at best. He'd spent the night combing through research logs, databases, and every classified xenobiology file he had clearance for, trying to find any precedent for an ability like hers, and the best he'd come up with was a whole lot of nothing. I need data, he muttered, rubbing his temples. I need more samples. Maybe I should get another test subject. Sarah's ears twitched sharply. Elias paused. What? She tilted her head slightly. You wish to touch other people? He blinked. For science. Yeah. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something about her posture shifted ever so slightly. It took Elias a second to recognize it. Wait, are you jealous? Sarah blinked, her face unreadable. I do not know this word. Oh, don't give me that. Elias scoffed. You understood sarcasm yesterday. You definitely know what jealousy is. Sarah's long ears twitched again, but this time it was a more agitated motion. You assume incorrectly, she said smoothly. I do not experience such things. Elias squinted at her. She stared back. A long, suspicious silence stretched between them. Then Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. All right, if you're not jealous, then hypothetically, if I went and grabbed one of the engineers and said, hey, let me poke your arm for science, you'd be completely fine with that. Sarah's expression remained perfectly neutral. Yes. Elias folded his arms. And if I told you I was going to spend the afternoon touching different people to see if they also trigger your weird past feeling ability? Sarah's fingers twitched against the table, barely perceptible, but Elias Caught it a slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. Sarah, are you possessive? Sarah's ears flicked sharply downward. You are being insufferable, Elias barked. Out a laugh. Oh my God, you are jealous, Sarah exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of her nose. Your tendency to create unnecessary social conflicts is exhausting, Elias grinned. Yeah, well, your tendency to be a telepathic cheat code is also exhausting, so I think we're even. Sarah sighed but didn't argue. Elias smirked, leaning back in his chair. Look, you can't blame me for wanting to test this on someone else. I'm a scientist, this is what I do. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then with unnerving calm she reached across the table and tapped her fingertip lightly against his wrist. Elias barely had time to react before the sensation slammed into him, not words, not thoughts, feelings. A sharp, overwhelming wave of loss, the distant memory of a world that no longer existed, a sky that had been so blue but was now just an echo in the back of her mind. Sarah pulled her hand away. Elias sat very, very still for the first time in his life. Words completely failed him. Sarah exhaled softly. You see now, she murmured, I do not need another test subject. You are enough. Elias swallowed hard. His brain scrambled to process what had just happened. He had felt it not just as a vague concept, but as if the memories were his own, and that ache, that deep, hollow loneliness, he had never felt anything like it before. He sucked in a breath, running a hand through his hair. Okay, yep, that was, he gestured vaguely. A thing. Sarah arched an elegant brow. A thing, yeah, Elias muttered. A big, weird, existential thing. Sarah exhaled, shaking her head in amusement. Your vocabulary is astounding. Elias shot her a look. Hey, you just mind punch me with alien grief. Excuse me if my vocabulary is currently malfunctioning. Sarah's lips twitched, but she said nothing. Elias drummed his fingers against the table, still trying to shake the residual feeling. So what? Your species just does this naturally. Sarah tilted her head slightly. Yes. Elias frowned. You ever, I don't know, warn people before throwing your entire emotional history at them? Sarah's ears twitched. Did you warn me before touching me? Elias opened his mouth, then shut it again. Okay, fair point. Sarah smirked. Elias huffed, rubbing his temples. All right, so if I keep touching you, am I just going to keep getting random pieces of your past? Sarah considered this. Perhaps. Elias squinted. That wasn't a yes or a no, it was not. Sarah agreed. Elias exhaled sharply. Fantastic love that for me. Sarah watched him with quiet amusement. You are not afraid? Elias blinked. Of you? She nodded. He scoffed. Sarah, I work with sentient fungi that communicate through pheromones, and once had to surgically remove a sentient tapeworm from a diplomat. This is weird, but it's not the weirdest thing I've dealt with. Sarah's brows lifted slightly. Sentient tapeworm? Elias grimaced. Yeah, you do not want to know how that thing tried to negotiate. Sarah's lips twitched. Perhaps I do. Elias groaned. You're the worst. Sarah smirked. Elias shook his head, leaning back in his chair with a long sigh. He still had so many questions, and absolutely no idea where this was all leading, but one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Elias sat hunched over his terminal, staring at a blinking cursor like it had personally offended him. Subject exhibits a unique form of somatosensory perception that allows for an immediate emotional and mnemonic connection upon skin contact. He typed, then he frowned, deleted the sentence, started again. Subject touches people and learns their embarrassing childhood secrets. He exhaled, more accurate, but probably not the scientific approach his superiors would appreciate. Behind him, Sarah spoke. You are struggling. Elias flinched, turning to find her standing right there. Silent as ever, she had an uncanny ability to move like a shadow. No footfalls, no sound, just appearing. It was frankly deeply unfair that someone that tall could be that quiet. You really got to stop sneaking up on me like that, Elias muttered, rubbing his face. Sarah's ears twitched. I did not sneak, you were simply unaware. Yeah, well, my awareness is already overburdened with existential dilemmas. Thanks. Elias shot back. Sarah stepped closer, glancing at his screen. You are writing about me trying to. Elias admitted, but how the hell do I even categorize this? We don't have a standard for alien woman knows your high school crush just by poking your arm. Sarah tilted her head. It was Emily Reynolds. I no, Elias groaned, dropping his head onto the desk. Sarah looked smug. You enjoy this, don't you? Elias mumbled into his sleeves. I find your reaction intriguing. Sarah admitted. Yeah, well, I find my reaction mortifying. Elias Grumbled. Sarah sat across from him, resting her chin against her hand. You react with humor when uncomfortable, she observed. Elias rolled his head to the side to glare at her. Gee, you get that from touching me too, or did you just put two and two together? Sarah blinked, utterly unbothered. It was not difficult to determine. Elias let out a long breath, sitting back up. All right. Fine, you want to help me figure this out? He gestured at the screen. Because I am this close to just filing a report that says it's magic, I ain't got to explain anything. Sarah arched an eyebrow. That would be inaccurate, would it? Elias countered, because at this point, magic feels like the only explanation left. Sarah considered this. You dismiss what you cannot yet quantify. I compartmentalize what I cannot yet quantify, Elias corrected, so that I don't have a complete mental breakdown in the middle of lunch. Sarah's lips twitched, but she said nothing. Elias sighed. All right, how does it work then? Explain it to me in a way that doesn't sound like sorcery. Sarah folded her hands. My people do not perceive time as you do. Elias frowned. You experience time differently. Sarah nodded. We do not see past and present as separate, they are layered. When I touch you, I feel those layers compressed into a single moment. It is not reading your thoughts, it is experiencing them as they have shaped you. Elias stared at her. That's vaguely horrifying. Sarah smiled faintly. You are very loud, Elias. He squinted. Excuse me. Sarah tapped a finger against the table. You are not subtle. Your emotions, your experiences, they cling to you with great intensity. Even without touch, you radiate them. Elias scoffed. Great, so I'm a walking broadcast of personal baggage. Fantastic. Sarah smirked. It is endearing. Elias groaned. You would think that. Sarah's expression softened just slightly. Do you truly wish to understand? Elias hesitated. Yeah, he admitted. I do. Sarah considered him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she reached out her fingers, brushing lightly against his wrist. Elias inhaled sharply. It was not like before. This time it was slower, less of an overwhelming flood and more of a ripple, gently spreading outward. Images flickered at the edges of his mind. Impressions he knew weren't his own. A world bathed in twilight at sky, a deep violet dotted with unfamiliar constellations, towering trees with bioluminescent veins, their roots humming with unseen energy, the feeling of belonging, of being surrounded by voices that understood without words. Then emptiness, the sharp gutting void of something vast and beautiful gone. Elias gasped as the sensation ebbed away. Sarah withdrew her hand. Now you understand. Elias sat frozen for a moment, blinking hard as he tried to reorient himself. That was he exhaled. Holy hell. Sarah was watching him carefully. It is difficult to carry. Elias swallowed. Yeah, I felt that. He hesitated, then asked, what happened to your world? Sarah's ears dipped slightly, the first real sign of emotion she'd shown. It is gone. Elias frowned. Gone how? Sarah exhaled, looking away. Not all destruction comes from war or disaster, Elias. Some things fade because they are forgotten. Elias stared at her. Wait, you're saying your entire civilization just vanished because people stopped remembering it? Sarah was silent for a long time, then quietly she said yes. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. That shouldn't be possible, and yet, Sarah murmured, it is. Elias dragged a hand through his hair, his mind racing. You remember it, though that means it's not completely gone. Sarah gave him a small, sad smile. One mind is not enough to hold a world in place. Elias' chest tightened for the first time since meeting her. He understood, truly understood. She wasn't just an alien woman with a strange ability. She was the last echo of a forgotten people. A slow, determined fire sparked in his gut. Okay, he said, straightening. Then we make sure it's remembered. Sarah blinked at him. You cannot change what has been lost. Elias huffed. Maybe not, but I can document it. I can record everything you know, everything you remember. If knowledge is the only thing holding your world together, then let's make sure it stays held together. Sarah studied him, her silver-flecked eyes unreadable. Then finally she exhaled. You are very loud, Elias. He smirked. You keep saying that, but you haven't walked away yet. Sarah's lips twitched. Number I have not. Elias grinned, rolling his shoulders. All right, time to do some actual science. Sarah tilted her head. And how do you propose we begin? Elias cracked his knuckles. By getting me another cup of coffee, because I have so many questions and I'm going to need fuel to get Through them, Sarah sighed, I will steal from the officers' lounge again now. That's teamwork, Elias said, grinning, and for the first time Sarah laughed. Elias drummed his fingers against the side of his coffee mug, staring at the console screen with the intensity of a man trying to manifest an epiphany through sheer stubbornness, so he said, glancing at Sarah, let me get this straight, your people don't just remember the past, they what hold it, keep it alive just by thinking about it. Sarah, sitting across from him with an air of patient amusement, nodded, not just thinking, feeling, remembering in a way that is real. Elias exhaled, that's wild, that is so wild, do you realize how many physicists would lose their collective minds over this? Sarah's long ears twitched. I suspect you will inform me. Absolutely, Elias said, pointing at her, because you're telling me that memory, subjective, messy, unreliable memory, can literally hold a civilization in place. That's like saying nostalgia is an active force in the universe. Sarah tilted her head. Do your species not already believe in the power of stories? Elias opened his mouth, paused. Okay, that was actually a good point. All right, fine. He admitted people tell stories to preserve history, that part I get, but you're saying if the stories stop, the entire civilization stops? Sarah nodded. Elias frowned. That means your species, your entire people, had no physical records, no books, no archives, no data caches. Sarah looked at him with mild amusement. And if they had? Elias groaned. You're saying it wouldn't have mattered, aren't you? Sarah spread her hands slightly. What is a record without someone to understand it? A language without a speaker is only ink on a page. Elias made a noise somewhere between frustration and awe. Okay, that's profound, but also extremely inconvenient. Sarah smirked. Elias pointed a finger at her. You enjoy making my brain hurt, don't you? I find it intriguing, she said smoothly. Elias groaned, rubbing his face. All right, whatever, say, I buy into this whole memory sustains reality thing. That still doesn't explain how you experience people's past when you touch them. Sarah considered him, then without warning, she reached out and tapped his wrist. Elias tensed, bracing himself, and was immediately overwhelmed by the sensation of laughter, not his own, someone else's. A woman's voice, warm and affectionate, teasing, but kind. He saw flashes of movement, sunlight filtering through a canopy of golden leaves, the crisp bite of autumn air, a hand ruffling his hair. You, Elias Carter, are entirely too serious for your own good. Then, just as quickly it was gone. Elias sucked in a sharp breath, his heart hammering. He stared at Sarah, wide-eyed. What the hell was that? Sarah withdrew her hand, watching him carefully. A memory. But not your own. Elias blinked rapidly, that he hesitated. That was my sister. Sarah inclined her head. Yes. Elias swallowed. How? Sarah exhaled. Memories do not exist in isolation, they are shared, interwoven. When I touch you, I do not simply see your past, I see the echoes of those who shaped you. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. That was from years ago, he muttered. Years? Sarah's gaze softened. And yet it is still within you. Elias exhaled shakily. He hadn't thought about that moment in a long time, hadn't allowed himself to, but now with just a single touch Sarah had yanked it forward like it had happened yesterday. That's he rubbed the back of his neck. That's a lot. Sarah nodded. Elias hesitated, then gave her a lopsided smile. You ever consider charging for therapy sessions? Sarah blinked. I do not know this word. Elias barked out a laugh. That explains so much. Sarah tilted her head. You use humor to deflect discomfort. Yep, Elias said cheerfully, and I refuse to self-reflect on that. Sarah looked deeply unimpressed. Elias sighed, rubbing his face. All right, so you don't just see memories, you see the connections between people. That's why you knew about Emily Reynolds. Sarah's lips quirked. Among other things. Elias groaned. I am never living that down, am I? Sarah's smirk was answer enough. Elias huffed, shaking his head. Okay, so if your people needed memory to keep their civilization going, and those memories are all interconnected, he frowned. What happens when the connections break? Sarah's expression shifted, subtle but significant. Her fingers curled slightly against the table. Elias inhaled. That's what happened, isn't it? Sarah's ears dipped slightly. Yes. Elias leaned forward. How? Sarah hesitated, then said quietly, It was not war, not disaster, it was erosion. One by one, the connections frayed. People forgot, not all at once, not in a way that could be measured, but slowly, and then one day there was nothing. Elias felt a shiver crawl up his spine. You're saying your people just disintegrated? Sarah shook her head. Not all, some of us survived, but we were severed, and when you are severed from something vast and ancient, you are left adrift. Elias exhaled slowly. Sarah folded her hands in her lap, her voice quiet. I do not know how many of us remain. Elias stared at her, something heavy settling in his chest. You're alone, he said softly. Sarah's gaze flickered, but she didn't answer. Elias hesitated, then carefully, deliberately, he reached across the table and tapped her wrist. Sarah inhaled sharply. Elias didn't see anything, didn't feel the rush of memory the way she did, but he saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her eyes widened just slightly in surprise. See, Elias said gently, now you know what it's like. Sarah studied him, her silver-flecked eyes unreadable, and slowly she exhaled. Loud, she murmured, so very loud. Elias grinned. Yeah, well, you keep saying that and you still haven't walked away. Sarah's lips twitched. No, she admitted. I have not. Elias leaned back in his chair, stretching. Well, guess that means you're stuck with me. Sarah huffed a quiet laugh, so it would seem, and just for a moment the weight in the air lifted. Elias paced the length of the lab, running a hand through his already messy hair. The coffee in his mug had long gone cold, but he still clung to it like a lifeline. Across the room, Sarah sat perched on the edge of the desk, watching him with the patience of someone waiting for an inevitable conclusion to crash down on an overactive human brain. All right, Elias said, stopping mid-stride and pointing at her. I have the question, the big one, the one that has been chewing at the edge of my very mortal consciousness ever since we started this whole memory sustains reality conversation. Sarah tilted her head. Proceed. Elias took a deep breath. What happens when you touch another one of your kind? Sarah blinked for the first time since he'd met her. She actually looked caught off guard. Elias narrowed his eyes. Oh, that got a reaction. He jabbed a finger at her, which means I am on to something. Sarah exhaled, folding her arms. It is not a simple answer, neither was I experienced. Peoples pass through touch, but here we are. Elias took a sip of his awful cold coffee and immediately regretted it. He made a face. That was a mistake. Sarah smirked. Your people drink substances that cause disgust. Yeah, well, we call it commitment to the bit, Elias muttered, setting the cup down. Then he turned back to her, arms crossed. So what happened? Sarah studied him for a moment, then she said, when we touch one another, we do not just see memories, we see everything. Elias frowned. Everything. Sarah's expression was unreadable, not just the past, the present, the emotions as they are being felt, the weight of their experiences, their fears, their joys. It is overwhelming. There is no barrier, no filter, only truth. Elias exhaled. So it's like, he snapped his fingers, instant, mutual, complete understanding. Sarah inclined her head. Yes. Elias sat down, rubbing his temples. That is so much. Sarah huffed a quiet laugh. It is why we did not touch often, not without intent. Elias drummed his fingers against his knee. So what you're telling me is if two of your people high-fived, they just instantly know each other's entire life story. Sarah gave him a dry look. Our culture did not encourage high fives. Elias grinned. Well, that's just tragic. Sarah shook her head. You are impossible. Elias leaned back, resting his hands behind his head. You keep saying that, and yet here you are voluntarily interacting with me. Sarah exhaled, but there was amusement in her gaze. Then Elias frowned, something clicking into place in his head. Wait. He sat up straight. If touching one of your kind means instant understanding, and all those connections were lost. Sarah's expression shifted. Elias inhaled. That means you haven't touched another one of your people in. He hesitated. How long? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward the far wall as if looking beyond it, beyond this place. Then finally she said, since before my world was lost. Elias' chest tightened. Sarah, she met his gaze. It is not something I dwell on, she said simply. Elias ran a hand over his face. Damn. Sarah tilted her head. Why do you react this way? Elias let out a dry laugh. Because that is devastating, Sarah. She considered this, then said, to you perhaps. Elias shook his head to anyone. Sarah regarded him, then in a softer tone said, I have known nothing else for a long time. Elias exhaled. Yeah, well, that doesn't make it any less awful. He hesitated, then added, do you want to find them? Sarah's ears twitched slightly. Elias leaned forward. You said some survived. You don't know how many or where they are, but if they're out there, he hesitated, would you want to see them again? Sarah studied him. Would you? Elias blinked. Would I? What if your people were scattered? If you were adrift as I am, would you seek them? Elias opened his mouth, hesitated. He thought about his sister, about the way her laughter still echoed in his memories, about the way time had eroded certain details, but never the feeling of those moments. Yeah, he said quietly, I think I would. Sarah was silent for a long time, then finally she said, so would I? Elias inhaled sharply. Sarah tilted her head slightly, but such things are not so simple. My people have been lost for a long time. Even if I found them, they may not remember as I do. Elias frowned. You mean they could be disconnected? Sarah nodded. Elias exhaled. That's. He shook his head. That's terrifying. Sarah's lips twitched. Yes. Elias dragged a hand through his hair. Well, I guess there's only one thing to do then. Sarah arched an eyebrow. And that is? Elias grinned. Find out where the hell they went. Sarah blinked. You make it sound easy. Oh, it absolutely isn't, Elias said, standing, but if you think I'm just going to sit here and not try to solve this mystery, you do not know me well enough yet. Sarah sighed, standing as well. This is a foolish pursuit. Absolutely, Elias said cheerfully. Sarah gave him a long look. And you are set on it completely? Sarah exhaled, then to his surprise she smirked. Then I suppose I will accompany you. Elias grinned. Now that's the spirit. Sarah sighed again. This will end in disaster probably, Elias said, slapping the console, but at least it'll be entertaining. And with that the hunt began. Elias slouched in the pilot's chair, boot propped up on the console as the Osprey hummed beneath him, her engines carrying them into deep space. The ship's dashboard flickered with readouts, maps, and a particularly unhelpful star chart that Elias had been glaring at for the past 15 minutes. This is hopeless, he muttered, rubbing his face. We are officially searching for a ghost civilization with nothing but sheer optimism and a gut feeling. Sarah sat beside him, her long fingers hovering over the controls, adjusting their trajectory with practiced ease. Hope is an effective motivator. Elias sighed. Yeah, well, so is dumb luck, and I'm starting to think we're relying on a lot of that right now. Sarah didn't argue, which was frankly concerning. Elias sat up straighter, eyeing her. Wait, you do have a plan, right? Sarah gave him a sidelong glance. We have leads. Elias pointed at her. That is not the same thing as a plan. Sarah's expression remained infuriatingly neutral. A plan implies certainty. This search has none. Elias groaned. Fantastic love, that really inspiring levels of confidence. Sarah, she smirked. And yet you continue. Elias grumbled something under his breath before leaning forward, studying the star chart. Okay, so let's go over this again. We know your people weren't completely wiped out, just severed from each other. Yes, Sarah nodded. Correct, and that means there could still be fragments of memory, people who remember, but maybe not in the way you do. Yes, Elias exhaled, tapping the console. All right, so that means we're looking for places where someone might still carry the echoes of your people's past, even if they don't realize it, which, let me tell you, really narrows things down. Sarah arched an eyebrow. It does. Elias gestured dramatically at the infinite expanse of space beyond the viewport. No, Sarah, that was sarcasm. She smirked. Elias huffed. Okay, but seriously, where do we even start? Sarah reached for the controls, bringing up a holographic display of planetary records. There were once places where my people's presence was strong. If echoes remain, they will be there. Elias frowned at the map. And let me guess, these places are not conveniently located nearby. Sarah was silent for a beat. Elias groaned. Of course not. Why would anything about this be easy? Sarah tapped the console, highlighting a planetary system. Here. Elias squinted. Cars 4. That place is barely habitable. What were your people Doing there, Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. It was once a place of gathering, a neutral ground where memories were shared. Elias leaned back. You mean like a cultural archive of sorts, Sarah said, but not in the way you understand archives. It was not about written records, it was about feeling, a place where experiences were preserved. Within those who came to remember. Elias scratched his head. You guys really had a thing against books, huh? Sarah smirked. Words can be misinterpreted, a feeling is harder to distort. Elias snorted clearly. You've never been on the receiving end of an extremely awkward hug. Misinterpretation happens, Sarah exhaled. Chorus 4 is the best place to begin. Elias eyed the map, then sighed, stretching all right. What's the worst that could happen? Sarah blinked. Many things, Elias groaned. That was rhetorical, Sarah. She smirked again, and Elias had the distinct realization that she enjoyed messing with him. Shaking his head, Elias engaged the hyperdrive, the stars stretching into streaks of light as the Osprey leapt toward their destination. Karis IVTH was not what Elias had expected. Then again, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Maybe some grand ruins, some dramatic remnants of an ancient civilization. What they got was a barren, craggy landscape with jagged cliffs and a perpetually overcast sky that made everything look one minor weather shift away from total collapse. This place is cheerful, Elias muttered. Stepping down the Osprey's ramp, his boots crunched against dry, brittle rock. Really has that vacation hotspot energy. Sarah walked beside him, scanning the terrain. This place once thrived. Elias frowned. How? Sarah gestured toward the cliff. Structures were not built in the way you understand, they were woven into the land itself. Connected by memory. What you see now is an echo. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. All right, so if there are any lingering traces of your people's past, where do we find them? Sarah closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Then, after a long pause, she said, below. Elias blinked. Below? Sarah pointed toward a narrow passage in the cliffs. Elias sighed. Of course, there's a creepy underground element. Why wouldn't there be? Sarah ignored him, already moving toward the passage. Elias groaned, following her. One of these days, like to go on an adventure that does not involve descending into ominous caverns just once. Sarah's voice echoed back. Your complaints are noted. They stepped into the passage, the light from the surface fading as the tunnel sloped downward. The air grew cooler, thick with the weight of something old. Then, just as Elias was about to make another joke about his deeply concerning life choices, Sarah suddenly stilled. Elias nearly bumped into her. What? Sarah's ears twitched. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, we are not alone. Elias' stomach dropped. Define not alone. Sarah exhaled. Something remains. Elias swallowed something. Could we be a little more specific? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Then, after a beat, she whispered, listen. Elias held his breath, and then, faint but unmistakable, he heard it, a whisper, not words, not a voice, but a memory drifting through the darkness like a forgotten echo. And whatever it was, it had been waiting for a very, very long time. Elias held his breath. The whisper, that strange, drifting memory, brushed against the edges of his mind. Feather light, but undeniably there beside him. Sarah stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Her long ears twitched as if she could hear something he couldn't. Elias cleared his throat, whispering, so how bad? On the scale of mildly eerie to, oh no, we should definitely run. Is this? Sarah exhaled. It is neither. That's not comforting, Sarah. She tilted her head. It is not meant to be. Elias groaned, quietly rubbing his temples. Fantastic. Love that for us. Then, before he could make another joke to mask his unease, Sarah moved. She stepped forward, deeper into the cavern, her fingers trailing along the cold stone wall. The whispering grew clearer, not words exactly, but impressions, flashes of something old, something waiting. Elias followed, gripping his flashlight like a lifeline. You're acting like you know what this is. Sarah didn't look back. I do not, but I understand it. Elias squinted. That is deeply unhelpful. Then suddenly, the cavern shifted. It wasn't a physical change. Nothing crumbled, nothing moved. But the atmosphere thickened. The whisper turned into a low hum vibrating against Elias ribs, and then just as quickly as it began it spoke, not aloud, not in sound. But directly into Elias' thoughts. You remember Elias' breath hitched his skin. Prickled, he turned to Sarah. Okay, nope, absolutely not, we are not just walking. Past that, like it didn't just happen. Sarah's expression remained unreadable. It recognizes you. Elias blinked me, he gestured to himself. I am 100% not an ancient memory. Alien. Sarah shook her head. Number, but you have carried my memories. Elias hesitated. Wait, are you saying I'm like radiating second-hand alien energy? Sarah's lips twitched. A crude description, but not incorrect. Elias dragged a hand down his face. Oh. Perfect, just what I always wanted, to be haunted by cosmic déjà vu. Before Sarah could respond, the whisper returned, stronger this time, not forgotten. And then, like a thread pulling loose, a wave of sensation crashed over Elias. For a moment, he wasn't standing in the cavern anymore, he was somewhere else, a city that didn't exist, towers carved from stone, their surfaces shimmering with memories woven into their very structure, a sky that pulsed alive with something unseen, and people. Sarah's people moving through the streets, their hands brushing as they passed, sharing understanding in an instant, then rupture. The sky shattered, the connections broke, and everything faded. Elias staggered back into himself, gasping. Sarah caught his arm. What did you see? Elias shook his head, his heart hammering. I don't even know how to describe it. He exhaled sharply. Your people, your home, and then gone. Sarah's gaze darkened. The severance. Elias swallowed hard. This place remembers. Sarah nodded. Because it was once part of us, the whisper hummed again. But this time it wasn't just an echo, it was a presence, and then forming out of the dim light, a figure stepped forward. Elias jerked back. Nope, absolutely not dealing with ghosts today. Sarah, however, remained still. The figure wasn't fully there, half solid, flickering like a memory caught between existence and oblivion, and yet it looked at Sarah with recognition. You remain. Sarah inhaled. So do you? Elias gaped between them. Okay, I feel like I should be more concerned about the fact that we're talking to a literal spectral entity, but sure, let's just roll with it. The figure tilted its head. You carry the echoes. Elias blinked. Me. Sarah turned to him. You touch my memories. Elias, and memories sustain reality. Elias' stomach dropped. So you're saying I helped bring this back? Sarah nodded. Yes. Elias let out a weak laugh. Great, that's normal. That's so normal. The figure regarded Sarah once more. You seek what was lost? Sarah hesitated, then said, yes. The figure reached out, its fingers nearly brushing hers. Then remember, a pulse of energy spread through the cavern. The walls flickered just for a second, with the remnants of what once was the city, the people, the connection, and then like dust caught in the wind, the vision drifted away, but something remained. Elias shuddered. Tell me that wasn't just for dramatic effect. Sarah closed her eyes, inhaling. Number, it was a thread, a path. Elias raised an eyebrow. A path to what exactly? Sarah opened her eyes. To the ones who remember. Elias exhaled. So we're not at the end of this, are we? Sarah turned to him, something softer in her gaze. Number, but we are no longer at the beginning either. Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. You are the only person who could say something that cryptic and make it sound profound. Sarah smirked. A skill I take pride in. Elias shook his head, then looked back toward the cavern's entrance. All right, what now? Sarah stepped forward. Now we follow the memory. Elias stared at her for a moment. Then with a resigned chuckle he said, yeah, all right, let's do this. As they ascended back to the surface, something felt different. The air was lighter, the silence less empty. Elias wasn't sure if it was the memories doing or if it was just him, but as he glanced at Sarah, at the way she walked with just a little more certainty, a little more purpose, he realized something. She wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, neither was the end.